Hi there. This is a specific point from my review of House of the Dragon Season 3, Episode 1, which I split off into its own standalone video here in order to go over it in more detail. The big scene of Alicent manipulating Aemond to leave King's Landing, even after he was aware Rhaenyra was coming with her new dragons. I felt it was kind of clunky. It's a change, and I like the book version better. But I have to admit that if you sit down and analyze it, the plot mechanics as presented make sense enough that they hold up reasonably. And the whole point of this video I'm telling you up front is that there's a difference between a plot hole and a thought-out change that I simply didn't like. In the books, of course, Alicent doesn't turn on Aemond for being so ruthless, or meet with Rhaenyra to hand over the city rather than let Aemond continue in power. Now, she isn't one of the Warhawks. Her and Otto are the ones that want to negotiate more, but this is still obviously, this is outright a change. But they set up, he's getting so ruthless, she can't go along with it anymore. But in the book, Aemond's grand strategy for the entire campaign was that because Rhaenyra's main land army is gathering at Harrenhal for a strike on King's Landing, the Greens would attack Harrenhal first, in a pincers movement. Attack on two fronts, the Lannisters' main army from the west, while Criston Cole's smaller army attacked from the east, backed up by Aemond on Vhagar. Daemon, however, being a cunning and experienced commander, accurately predicted what Aemond was going to do. That's what I would do in his place. When his real goal was actually to lure Aemond and Vhagar away from King's Landing, leaving only a skeleton force behind to defend it. Then the Blacks could quickly capture King's Landing using their dragons and the Velaryon fleet. The Velaryon fleet doesn't have nearly as many men as like a land army, but they can get anywhere really fast because they're on ships. And of course, their main land army, numbering in the tens of thousands at Harrenhal, the Blacks' main army wouldn't simply wait at Harrenhal to be attacked on two fronts, caught in a pincers movement. They'd abandon Harrenhal to focus their full force west against the Lannister army, to attempt what's called a defeat in detail. Don't wait for the pincers to come to you, focus everything on one of the pincers. And they even explained this was Aemond's plan back in the council meeting from episode 6 of season 2. The difference here is that in the book, Aemond didn't know that Rhaenyra had suddenly gained more dragon riders by hiring up Targaryen bastards, which essentially doubled her number of dragons at her command. That they wouldn't have been able to take King's Landing without them. A display of force so overwhelming that the few remaining Hightower guards just gave up. That it was just Daemon on just Caraxes. They'd try to snipe him with scorpions and crossbow bolts and arrows and things, but 6 huge dragons all at once, they just gave up and surrendered. In the TV show, they did already establish that Aemond knows about the bastard dragon riders. He knows about the dragon seeds. Back in episode 7 of last season, they had Ulf buzz the city on Silverwing. And that was for a purpose. They explain next episode. Rhaenyra states, I had hoped a show of strength would frighten him back into a defensive posture, maybe even negotiations, and instead he panicked and burned Sharp Point and killed hundreds of civilians. But given that they introduced this change, you do need to logically follow through on it. Pick up, why would Aemond leave King's Landing now when he knows Rhaenyra has more dragons? To be clear, I want to avoid what I call downstream thinking. That the actual defense Benioff and Weiss had for the Sansa assault storyline in season 5 was, well, once we married Sansa to this habitual assaulter Ramsay, what choice did we have but for him to assault her? Like, they'd say that in interviews, and the moderator would not call them out on how ridiculous that is. On top of that, in the commentary tracks, they admit we didn't write ourselves into a corner. We wanted to give this to Sophie to act the hell out of it, and then to cynically in public act like we didn't have a choice. because they're embarrassed? Wow, but that's cynically deflecting the question of why they did it in the first place is, oh, I wrote myself into a corner. But on top of that, so many things Benioff and Weiss did weren't just bad because they were changes, but because they were obvious plot holes. The plot mechanics didn't make sense, particularly, like, the book fans were yelling about this in seasons 5 and 6, where there was still some book basis to things. Season 7 and season 8 after that didn't even have direct comparisons to the books, and everyone was pointing out how the plot mechanics of this are ridiculous. You have dragons zipping to the wall, everything wrong with the White Hunt. People are still, even this week, putting out why season 7 made no sense videos. That's not even touching on season 8 itself, which it's just, it got worse every year because people let it metastasize rather than criticize them. But you can't even say 7 and 8 are definitely changes when there's blatant problems of basic plot mechanics. So in the later seasons, even season 6, something like, why didn't Sansa tell Jon about the Vale army? That isn't a change from the books as such. I don't think the Battle of the Bastards even happens in the books. But as presented, this makes no sense. That and, like, how did the Vale army get there? Why is there a 20-foot pile of corpses in an open field instead of going around it? All these things that made no sense with all the other subplots. Or how is Euron's fleet miraculously teleporting around? Isn't a criticism because it's a book change, it's a criticism because it's ridiculous. You know, Dany forgot about the Iron Fleet when 3 scenes before she was directly told about it. And how is Euron able to expertly bullseye one dragon 3 times in rapid succession on a moving target, and then the entire fleet misses Dany? Other things, like they leave Hardhome by ship, and then miraculously they're in the middle of the continent again, coming back through Castle Black. All these other logical missteps, this has nothing to do with book comparisons, this is just bad writing, and you can't fall back on that defense anymore. My entire point in this video is just that my initial reaction, first time watching to this episode, was that Alicent's scene convincing Aemond to leave King's Landing anyway, in the back of my head, I instinctively felt it didn't make sense. Maybe this is just the old scars and tingling of, oh no, it's a Benioff and Weiss thing again, that it didn't make sense in terms of plot mechanics, that it's happening because it needs to happen. Thinking it over, I have to admit that in terms of pure plot mechanics, the writers did cover all their bases. The writers at least made it internally self-consistent. Alicent presents Aemond that he basically has 2 choices. You wait in King's Landing for Rhaenyra and her now doubled dragon force to attack, and they will attack before reinforcements can arrive. Or, instead of facing a 6-on-1 fight, you can rush to Harrenhal and try to kill Daemon 1-on-1. Admittedly, in the post-episode interviews and stuff, the actor said intellectually Aemond knows she's trying to manipulate him, but his emotions eventually win out over his intellect, which unfortunately is a real thing. You know, that just so much of he wants his mother's approval, playing on his fears, that I'm willing to accept that she presented a halfway plausible reason of, well, you're going to wait here and get 6-on-1, or you're going to try to face Caraxes 1-on-1 and probably kill Daemon, was a good enough explanation and presentable enough manipulation that, okay, I can see how that gets us back to where we need to be. I don't think it's great writing, I'm just saying it's not, why didn't Sansa tell Jon about the Vale army? That level of thing. The real question is that Alicent not only wants Aemond out of the city, but, you know, if you think about it, she is straight up horrified. She says to Helena, he's abandoning my brother Gwaine, his own uncle, plus Kristen, to their deaths by sending them to Harrenhal, when if they had gone there and the dragon seeds had stayed, they would have been killed, is what pushes her over the top. So there's enough elements in that I can kind of see a TV-only viewer accepting this without accusing it of plot illogic. Is Alicent capable of manipulating Aemond emotionally? Absolutely, that is a factor here. Unlike where they later season Littlefinger, where they said, no, he's a master manipulator. He isn't doing anything. He's just talking in a Snidely Whiplash voice, obvious villain. No, they tried to have real specific points of manipulation that they did have her use, and it's presentable. It's just, I wasn't feeling it. That's not really a good criticism. That, to my surprise, when I actually sat down and analyzed it, it works well enough, and I have to admit that the writers actually did think out reasons in universe. I'm struggling to verbalize this. I can still feel the hand of the writers. That's the phrase I use. I feel the hand of the writers guiding the characters instead of it just seeming like an organic outgrowth. That I can tell they needed a character to get from point A to point B, because the plot needed it. But they actually did provide reasons, just in a ham-fisted, clunky kind of way. That we know this is happening because it's Act 3 of 3 is when the final chase scene happens and all of that. Now, don't get me wrong, another thing I want to emphasize is, particularly because I've had time to go through the interviews, both actors did a really good job. And the dialogue itself wasn't forced. It's just, we could tell what this needed to do. So this is an extended part of my review for the episode. Just wanted to go over the ultimately mixed feelings I had on this scene, where I didn't consider it a high point. At the same time, I have to admit, it didn't really drag the episode down, and it did what it needed to do, without plot holes. It's just, this will not be looked on as a highlight. Oh, by the way, I didn't even think about this, that he kisses her on the lips at one point. If you're wondering why I buried this, just I didn't consider that an issue one way or the other. The bigger thing was the plot mechanics of army movements. It's a major thing. Is he going to be with Vhagar in King's Landing or Harrenhal? That in the behind-the-scenes videos themselves, I felt the actors gave a pretty good explanation of... They actually put considerable thought into that. I mean, we've already established that in the books, he doesn't have an edible complex. They have established he does in the show. And I will say this, if he had just passionately kissed his mother, the scene would have been awful. But instead, they said they tried to go for something psychologically complex. That the way they phrase it is, Ewan Mitchell flat out said, Aemond himself doesn't know what he's doing. He really doesn't understand his own complicated feelings towards his mother. So I had him really awkwardly, hesitantly kiss her on the lips that Aemond himself doesn't understand what he's doing. In the way that, like, in a murder mystery type show, a psychological thriller would have a character having a creepy love thing where he doesn't even know what he's doing, the murderer like that. So, okay, that if it was a straightforward, edible complex thing, it would have been lazy, but they put thought into it of, oh no, we wanted to be this kooky, weird scene showing how psychologically complex he is and fragmented. It didn't elevate anything. I wouldn't have put it in. I'm just saying that they put enough thought into it that I didn't feel it detracted from anything with lazy writing. It was just kind of there. And I don't want to keep remarking on it just because it seems like such a dog whistle of, yeah, that didn't really detract from anything, didn't add anything. The bigger thing to me was the long-term macro plot elements of how do we get Aemond as a major piece on the game board in this war and his dragon to Harrenhal. It worked well enough, and I like to think that if they were allowed to do... I really don't think the first 2 episodes were benefiting from live rewrites, that we know the first 2 episodes have problems from being leftovers from Season 2. In the better timeline than ours, maybe we would have had a 10-episode Season 2 where this scene could have been refined better. I was saying, it's not bad on paper, I can see what you were trying to do, it just came off as the rough draft of a better scene, is what I'm saying. In terms of the overall flow of events that you have to get Aemond there, it doesn't really bring up plot holes, so I keep going, I'll allow it. It's just, yes, I'm extending a grace period because of these first 2 episodes. So this didn't ruin the show for me, that we have to have this clunky scene of him getting to Harrenhal anyway. It didn't even ruin these 2 characters, like, by the next episode, or even within this season. It's just within this episode, on the scale of this episode, it wasn't one of the stronger points and didn't really add that much. Didn't actively detract from it either. It's just it wasn't really a standout moment for me. So I'm very curious how a TV-only audience would react to it. Would people be complaining, why is Aemond at Harrenhal? They made a reason enough of why he'd get there that they at least covered their writing. So we'll see what happens. Now, this is part of a set of videos I'm making expanding on points from my review, dashing them off audio only just to cover in more detail my thoughts on it. So please like and subscribe and check out the rest of my channel for all of those.